go. There we go. Lovely.
You could probably just do the restream one because it looks to me like the Instagram one is
It's
a
still
little
it.
backed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just don't know if we're gonna see comments.
We're not going to see comments. I know. So sad.
Yeah.
Let's
Okay.
get in frame here. Let's get comfy.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. It's my second live of the day.
Yeah, it's pretty big. This is the first time we're trying out this platform for folks that are are tuning in or called Restream. We're not
That's
getting
right.
paid by them, but it's what I use for my
We're
own
not getting paid
podcast
by them.
for soccer, and we're trying it out, see how it goes. Maybe this will spark us to continue doing our podcast more consistently. I hope so.
Yeah.
I was just looking at the last episode that we did, and it was in August, and it feels like we did it in August.
Yeah, it feels like we did it so long ago. But when you proposed the idea of, I don't know who proposed the idea of going live, but I was like, let's do it. Let's record an episode live. That should be fun.
Yeah, I feel like a little bit recharged to do this, and I think it's just a moment. It just took a minute to just reflect. I guess I hadn't really thought about the winter and what it did to my own body, and like what exactly is it that happens to me during winter, and now that we're kind of coming into spring and it's
A little
raining,
bit, yeah.
and it's kind of giving me a little bit of those vibes. Like I'm like, okay, well, it's time to bloom, as you would say, or get a little bit getting out of the sheltering, which has
Yeah.
been interesting.
I feel the same way. Like I'm starting to come out of the ground a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome back.
Welcome back to
Yeah.
folks who are tuned in. We're super happy to have you here. I'm Claudia.
And I'm Ariel.
And this is Not Your Mommy's Advice podcast, our first live recording. And yeah, let's get to it.
And so for folks that, if you're tuning in, it's your first time actually listening to us or not, maybe you're a loyal listener that hasn't left since, you just keep replaying those episodes that we had in August. And before that, what we do is we have the way we talk about things is randomized, and it's through a wheel generator or a randomizer generator, and it kind of gives us a topic, and it ranges from different things that maybe it's personal experiences or maybe it's just overall like relationship stuff that happens in relationships. We have been married. We just this September, right after our break of the podcast, we had our anniversary.
7 years.
7 years,
and then 9 years together.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're almost in the double digits.
We're almost in the double digits. Yeah,
just kind of nuts. Cause
good job, babe.
Thanks. You too. I mean, I remember when we first met, you're like, I haven't had a longer relationship than like 6 months.
I don't want to be a player no more.
Yeah, well, here I am, Mr. Consistency. I think I'm just
realizing. You're so wonderful for that. So you are consistent.
Yeah, I'm just, yeah.
And you put up with me, which is really nice.
It's a part of myself that I've grown to appreciate about myself. I really like to be consistent about shit. So even taking a break about this was like fucking killing me for the last couple of months.
I'm like,
how can we get on here? But yeah, all right.
Do you want to spin the wheel?
Yeah, let's spin the wheel.
Let's see what topic we're going to talk about today.
It's spinning for folks that.
I know you can't see it, but the wheel is spinning. It's coming to a stop.
I had a feeling, dude. I looked at this one and I'm like, I have a feeling it's going to be this one.
Oh, okay. Really?
Yeah.
All right. So queer relationships, challenges, and triumphs in love and acceptance.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Well, I think, my first immediate thought is that you identify as queer.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's right.
And I think having very little background on what that actually meant in in my perception, a heterosexual relationship. I guess how does that actually look like? I remember when you told me that, I got taken aback. So I'm like, so do you like other women, or do you like I don't know, is it like, are you gonna leave? Like, so there was a lot of
Mhm.
like uncertainty around this aspect, and it's also kind of new to me, if I'm just being like even more uh upfront about it, as I'm learning, and as I'm learning more about myself and in, I guess, your queerness or just queerness in general.
Mhm. I mean, I think that that feels true for me too. Like, it's been a journey, I think, for me in just like understanding who I am as a person in relationships and whether that's like romantic or platonic. So, I mean, of course, as with anybody else, but I mean, what's interesting is that like that when you ask me that question about like, oh, like you're gonna leave me for like a woman or for somebody else. I mean, I thought it was really interesting and it really took me aback because for me, obviously, I mean, not obviously, our relationship is still our relationship. The container and the parameters and the agreements that we have in our relationship are still the same because we have never negotiated them. And nor do I have any desire to. Like, we came into our relationship stating very explicitly that we're going to be in a close partnership. Like, we're in a monogamous relationship. And that feels very satisfying to me. That feels very fulfilling to me. And I think I've always openly told you, like, okay, if that ever changes, I'm going to bring that to you and talk to you about it first, as opposed to like, I don't know, like running out and cheating on you.
Hmm.
so, so yeah, I mean, I think that's where I like how my impression was of that question.
Hmm.
Now, I think that that also leaves a lot of curiosity and like, okay, so what's like the need that's like arising or emerging or the curiosity in those questions, I think, from you to me. Um,
Would you say that that's one of the challenges of being a queer person in, I guess, being the queer person in this relationship? Like, I don't know. To me, it just like I'm naturally like inquisitive, so like I'll ask a lot of questions,
mhm,
and but I can also see, because I remember this is one of the topics that I feel like I ask a lot of questions, and I it's not that I get frustrated, but I think that there's just a lot of confusion for me in the air about queerness and about like how that looks like in a relationship where person identifies as queer, the other person does not. So then how do like how does that look like? And I know that there's been moments of tension because of the questioning. It makes me think
yeah.
about I forget,
Your
we
questioning.
my questioning, not
Yeah.
yours, but my own questioning
Mhm.
about it. And I remember we had a talk, and I remember I feel like you walked away kind of like, "You're like, I don't want to talk about this anymore," or like, or just I think it got really heated because I kept asking questions, and I think it was just trying to clarify. But I don't know. I guess, is that a challenge? I think. I mean, and it's, I don't know, just kind of
Yeah, I mean,
throwing it out there too.
I think what feels challenging at the foundation is when you as a partner are not doing the emotional labor or inquiry around what your needs and requests are. So, in some of our conversations, there are things that you were saying where you were just like you were putting responsibility on me to like manage some of your emotional experience, which happens, like we all do it, right?
Hmm.
But the frustration in me was born out of that. So it's
The
not like
emotional labor.
exclusive to being queer, but it was like you had to work through something on your end before like bringing something to me. And it's not like you came to me and you're like, "Hey, I'm working through something on my end. Can you help me with that?" It was definitely more like, "Well, you, and here's what I'm thinking." And it felt very like you were putting the responsibility onto me, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
Like you were unhappy about something or about where my focus and attention was going. And then like didn't take responsibility for what you needed in that moment and like what requests you were making around it. So that's where the frustration was coming from for me. And I know that we've talked about it at length, so I think that that was clear.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back. Because I don't recall what the hell I was even talking about. Uh, and yeah, I think a part of that is correct. I think there was a lot of like in the moment processing, and like I think maybe not having the total like outlook of like you're not my therapist. Like there's not like a there
Hmm.
like I'm not. I mean, I can process stuff with you. I think we can do that, but
Hmm.
I think specifically with this, it's like I think there was or there is still like work to be done around questions, not necessarily like questioning queerness per se, but I think the concept of being queer and then also being in a relationship with somebody that's not queer. And like, so those questions are very much alive in me. And again, it's not to question the identity. I think it's
Yeah.
just a questioning of
Yeah.
what does that actually look like in a relationship, and one that I have very little like experience in. So like that's my own stuff coming up. So I would say that that's a challenge for me with a relationship with a queer person. Like I have a lot of questions, and
Hmm.
sometimes it doesn't feel like I can't ask you questions like that because I think queer people get questioned a lot. You know what I'm saying? About
Hmm.
their identities and like where they stand on things. And I, of course, I don't want you to like educate me, but I think that there is an aspect of not knowing that is a challenge.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, if I may expand on, I think the part of the conversation that felt particularly, can I share?
Oh, you want to dive into
Well,
to the
if
stuff that
I
was being
remembering
said? I don't
if
remember
I remember
listening.
the conversation specifically, what felt particularly inflammatory to me was like you were like, okay, so what does that mean? And I explained what my queerness meant to me, like how that manifests in my relationships, which is like queering the way that traditional relationships have been participated in and engaged in with our gender roles, with the way that we're raising our children, with the way that like Michael Madres come in and help raise my children, with potentially like the way that I want to live communally later on. So like in terms of like how intimately I do partnership with, not like sexually, but like how intimately I do partnership with my medicine sisters and with you, and like how I bring them in to my life feels like I'm queering the way that I have known to do things. Okay.
Mhm.
So that feels foundational to the way that I view myself and my own queerness, right? Okay. So then I'm explaining this to you, and you're like, well, I just don't understand. That doesn't really make sense to me. So it sounds like you need to figure that out. And so I was like, all right. And so at that point in the conversation, I was like, no, it sounds like you need to figure out how you feel about that and then come back to me and talk about
Yeah. No, I mean,
it.
yeah, I mean, when it's I mean, that's fucking, months ago. But
Yeah,
yes,
it was a long time
that
ago.
is
It's like,
the
oh, I
now
remember.
it's coming back to me. Yeah, I mean, I think a part of it is like again, I think it's just like the not understanding, and I think it's more of like not truly understanding again to kind of to your point of like not knowing my own experience around queerness, because queerness I think is one of the things that I know that it was around me, but
Mhm.
it wasn't talked about enough for me to have a background knowledge, and I'm also not placing myself too so much in communities that identify like that I'm like, oh yeah, like I understand this identity. So I'm still like I look at it as like, asking questions to trying to understand, and at the
Mhm.
same time within the not understanding, I'm also throwing it to you of like, well, you need to figure it out so that it makes sense to me.
Mhm.
And I think within that, I
I
think
think you said,
that's
like, "You need to read more about it." I was like, "I don't need to read shit about my lived experience."
yeah. And I mean, I think like yeah, I mean, I also I mean, I gravitate towards I think like I like to read about things. I like to like know things, like, you know, so, and reading is one of the things. So it makes total sense for me to be like, yeah, go read and then come tell me about it, right? As opposed to me being like, let me go read.
Yeah.
But one of the things that's hard is that there is actually no dialogue about like, you should go read this book or you should go read that. And so
Mm-hmm.
within that, then I'm like, well, I actually don't like. So then, so when I'm thinking about like what I'm also trying to say there is like, can you give me like, is there space to give me resources so that I can read and do it, because I don't know where to go. And I think like that's not to like fully like take myself out and like being like, oh, you know, poor me because I don't know. But I
I
think
hope not.
in that moment there is this sense of like kind of lostness. I don't even know if it's a
Yeah.
word.
I mean, that was
um
my sense. But it was like, oh, it feels, I don't know. I don't know what you were feeling actually in that moment to be lost.
to be lost, to be confused, and like to also feel like my partner is telling me something that I don't totally understand about them, and not knowing like what to actually do with that information also felt really scary as well, because I'm
Yeah.
like, no, I actually need you to explain it to me, because I feel like you're telling me you're about to leave. You know what you're saying?
Yeah.
Like,
So, I mean,
so
I
that,
feel
so
like
then there
that's
is
different
that
though.
there, I know, but you know what I'm saying? Like, but now this is like months in
Yeah.
reflection. Like, you're talking about like in the moment, it felt like you're about to fucking leave
Yes.
for another woman. You're gonna leave. You're gonna leave this family. And I'm like, what the fuck am I gonna do? And that's not to say that that's the end of the world, but like
But I feel
in
like
that
that is a
moment,
simple, that is a very straightforward question that you needed assurance or whatever, like an answer to that I could definitively answer. In this moment, I have no interest of pursuing a relationship with anybody else.
yeah. But I mean, I think, but it's also coupled in with me in my own trauma, in my own like things about not totally believing people, because I was raised by just a lot of lies.
Sure, sure. Yeah,
Like,
that makes sense.
there is this sense of like, I don't know if I actually believe you, even within that, like you telling me that.
Yeah.
So
I
like
mean, I
I
think that
need to
that's
make sure for myself
fair.
about like, where is this identity actually going to take you, and where's it going to take us, or where's it going to take our family, you know what I'm saying? So like there becomes this uncertainty, and again, I'm not saying this is like, oh, to justify the throwing it at you and then you having to educate me, like
Hmm.
that is my own work, but I am just kind of unraveling those, like I think those thoughts and those feelings that were happening in that moment about what was actually happening in regards to questioning uh, queerness in our relationship, and what that
Hmm.
looks like, and what does that mean for us, and what does that actually mean for me, and what is that, how does that actually look like for me to love somebody that's queer?
Yeah.
Because again,
I don't know. How does it look?
I mean, I would say that if I go to the second part of that question is like some triumphs. uh well, for me, I think I've really have grown in appreciation to your identity, in like, I think honoring, and not just women, but I think for the most part, I think it's women, right? And like how they hold you, and
Hmm.
in this like this holding that I can't do necessarily, if that
Hmm.
makes any sense. Like, I know
Hmm.
that we've talked about that recently, like, you know, when you go away with your girls, or with your women friends, or your, you know, folks that identify as women, like, uh there is a sense of like nurturing and like caring that happens, that you're like, yeah, I feel really like replenished, or I feel like really
Hmm.
seen, that it that has led me to like try to understand that, and then see that like you need that in your life, and that that's something really beautiful that you know about yourself, and that like you have that,
Hmm.
and that like I have a role to support you in doing that. So like to me, that's a triumph, because it's like coming from not knowing anything and still not knowing a lot, but knowing that I love you enough to know that like your queerness, you need this safety and you seek it here,
Hmm.
then of course I want you to go and go be there, so that you can get that replenished, because then we need you here. You know what I'm saying? Like we want you here too. So like that was also
Hmm.
an appreciation there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like what feels for me, I mean, I really appreciate, I think, our journey together in like, again, I always say the reason why I married you is because I'm like, I know you're going to do the work. Like, I know that you're introspective and that you're reflective and you're going to come to me and you're going to be like, all right, I'm like thinking about this, I'm reflecting on this, and I trust that that may not always lead you to me or back to me, but at least it's going to lead you to something true. Does that make sense? And integrous to you. And I'm like, that's really what I want, right? I think like what feels true for me that has changed within the course of our relationship over the last 7 years since we've been married has been like I see how it is to be like to allow myself to be held to be in relationship that is mutually reciprocal with women in my life and refuse to believe that just because you're a man, it means that like you either get a pass or will never get it or can't do it. So I feel like in the unlearning that is happening within me, like I heard a lot of women from the older generation be like, well, it's just a guy. You know how men are. Like, they're just not going to do that. They're just, he doesn't think that way. He doesn't work that way. He's whatever. He's not going to be affectionate. Like, all of these, like, whatever boxes that, like, the men in my life are put in, which are actually, like, quite infantilizing. Like, you're not even giving the men in their life an opportunity to show up for you in that way because you didn't ask. Or maybe they asked and it like, nothing changed. But like, I think what I'm realizing now is like, oh no, like I'm going to keep asking and I'm going to keep telling you. And I feel like that's what has been really born out of me in the last 6 months or so. I was like, no, I'm fucking like tired of whatever, like holding this logistical piece or this mental load here. Um, Help me out. Like, or like rise to the occasion or like come be on this team with me in an equitable way. Um, So I think that's what I'll say, and I'll pause there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what to say after that. I mean, I think like I I mean, I think it's a work in progress always. Uh and I mean, I'm not saying that I can't get there. I think like what I'm saying is like I see the value in that. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, okay, you go do that over there. That's your safe space, and
Oh,
go and
yeah, I didn't
go
think that's
take
what you were
care of
saying.
that, and then
Mhm.
come back, and you're still gonna need to do all that. But what I am saying is like there is, for me, like grown in like an appreciation for knowing that
Mhm.
exists, and to know that, because as men, I don't think that we get taught really to actually have that type of like relationship. We have relationships, but sometimes the relationships with men, at least for me, I'll speak from my own experience, can, and then maybe it's not transactional, but sometimes it's much harder to actually get to a deeper level, because maybe there's other shit happening, or we're just more guarded in what we share. But I do appreciate that there is a space for you to have that,
Mhm.
that aspect of your life. And I mean, I think you're right. I mean, it's not to say that like I'll never learn how to do it, but like,
I mean, that was not my intention of somehow like orienting to your deficits or anything like that. Like, it was more just like I'm not gonna cut you off at the invitation to like participate in my life in this way. I guess is what I was trying to say.
but I mean, in regards to what though? Like in regards to what you're getting from your friends that are women? Like, is that what you're? Is that, I'm
No,
a
I
little
think I was,
confused by
yeah,
that.
sorry. I think I was referring to like, remember when I came home, like, because my grandma recently passed away, and I was just like, man, this is like a lot of like thinking about the whole family system, logistical planning, emotional load, like caring for the key players that are like in their grief, at least like that are in close proximity to me.
Hmm.
And I was feeling quite frustrated with like the men in my life because they were just like, "Oh, well, why would you have to do that? Like, you don't have to do that." And I'm like, sure, I don't have to, but like, I was feeling frustrated because I was like, I'm the only one thinking about. I feel like I'm the only one thinking about that. So maybe like I'm not drawing like a clear intersection to like how this is all connected. But I mean, again, I think what I've shared is like when I'm in community with my like with my women friends, with my queer friends, like there's a way that it is mutually reciprocal. Like we are giving and we're taking and we're asking and we're like sharing responsibility. At least in the way that I am in the community. And it didn't feel like in these more traditional family systems, those things aren't really like alive and kicking. So I was like missing that. And I came home and I was expressing like a lot of frustration in that moment to you. Remember?
What I do?
Oh, you were like, I don't remember.
I don't recall.
Oh,
I don't
I mean, you said
recall
the same
what
thing.
I
I think
do.
you were like,
Uh,
well, why do you have to do that? I'm like, oh my God, you too? Why do you have to worry about how how this family is going to get cooked meals or how this program is going to get made? Like, why do you have to worry about these things? Like, don't worry about it. I'm like, no, that's not the way that this is working.
hey, well, I'm not perfect, man.
No, and it's not to call you out. I think it's just to me that shows me like, oh, you were not actually taught to think about these things. Like, no
Yeah.
one showed you. So I'm like,
No.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay. I mean, you'll get it. I know you'll get it eventually, and that's fine. But that's what I'm saying. That's also, I think, within that construct of like men staying in their lane and then being like, well, he's never going to think about that because he's a man. So whatever.
Yeah. I guess I'm having a hard time connecting where the identity piece comes in. I mean, I understand that aspect of like, you know, potentially learning these things about like maybe this reciprocal relationship that we're talking about, or that
Hmm.
maybe that you're seeking. And yeah, I guess it's just again, again, I go into more questions like how does that actually play in the dynamic that we have in regards to a queer person and a person that doesn't identify as queer, like the reciprocal, or maybe the lack of reciprocal nature of the relationship. um but I don't know. I think that word is really interesting, reciprocal, because it's something that, yeah, I feel like I've been also kind of like being challenged by in my own work. You know what I'm saying? Like being surrounded around a lot of women, and like being one of the few men teachers. Like there's a lot of like um, it's a lot of assumptions about like taking care of men, right? Of like,
Yeah.
oh,
My
what I'm
God.
saying, like, and shit like that. And
Can only
trying
imagine.
trying to to the best whenever I'm aware of it, to try to disrupt it. But I don't know. I look at this aspect of our relationship as something to disrupt, something to challenge myself in.
Hmm.
And I hope that like in my own questioning, there's like you don't ever feel like, or maybe you will feel, I don't know, but the feeling of like that it's not valid or that it's not true or whatever the case may be. I think I just ask questions just because that's just the way that I am.
Yeah.
And
God, I know.
um but yeah, is there any triumphs out of this? Because I feel like you've been kind of harping on like stuff that maybe are challenging, but is there any
But
triumphs that have
I really feel like it has been a triumph
what
because I mean,
has?
I feel like even openly expressing an identity as a queer person, like, I mean, maybe it's not like exclusive, like, it's not exclusive to like just our relationship, but I feel like there is there's an invisibility or there's a way that I'm not seen in my queerness because I'm in a hetero relationship. Like to the rest of the world, that's like this normal relationship. It's like, oh, I was in a relationship with a man, sure, whatever. And I was like talking to somebody within our community about it, and they were telling me that like, oh yeah, like I'm a queer wife, and like I'm married to this man. I'm like, oh my god, me too. So we were like, that's awesome because like anyway, my whole point is like coming into that identity and like openly expressing it, openly feeling like that's like a valid thing that I can say. And then you being like, cool, that's you. Like I've always felt like, even with the questions, you've always been like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like you, that's you. Cool. Like that's awesome. Like you're not like, that's not true. I mean, I don't know why anybody would ever say this, but that's not true. You're married to me. Like, how could that be possible? Those two things are conflicting. Like, so, I mean, I guess that's like a really low bar, but I feel like that has within myself been a triumph and a progression that has been able to flourish within the safety of our relationship. So that's one. And then like the conversations that we have had in the many, many, many iterations of it. It's like, you know, me telling you all of these different, like, very intimate things about myself, about like how I view the world and relationships that are like things that are kind of just like non-negotiable in the way that I move in the world. And you're like, all right, I don't totally understand it, but I'm like hearing it. That to me feels like a triumph because we're like, shit, this feels scary. I don't know. There's like a big question mark here. But we keep coming back and coming together and being like, yeah, well, like I still love you. So I guess we have time to figure it out, like that feels like a triumph and an acceptance.
Hmm.
So I by no means am trying to like only harp on challenges at all, actually. Like I feel like we're constantly having triumphs, like we're constantly having wins around it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's a topic that or it's an aspect of our relationship that I think to Gloria and Saldua's thing is in the shadows, and specifically for me. I think it's work that like I know I need to do, and aspects of it is still are a little scary. Maybe not the aspects of like you leaving, but there is aspects of like not knowing, and like I think the questioning, kind of to your point of like, oh, you're with me. What are you talking about? You can't do that. Like I don't explicitly say that, but those are some of the thoughts inside of me. You
Hmm.
know what I'm saying? And I think that is what comes up uh with this part of the identity. That's not to say that like I believe them, but those are some of the things in my mind that I'm like, how does that actually work? How does
Yeah.
that how does that coincide with what I'm experiencing? But it becomes it becomes a self-interrogation piece, and
Hmm.
it's I mean I think that this topic comes in in increments, at least in my life.
Hmm.
That's the way I'm experiencing it. It's just like it's not like a complete like overwhelming piece of like, oh, okay, here we go, blah 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 blah. But whenever they do arise, I feel like they're pretty concise, and even like straight to the point. Like because even right now, like you're making me, you're like every conversation we have about it, I feel like I'm walking away with like, okay, there is something here that like I can interrogate even further, which is like for me, like if I'm taking something out of this conversation that we're having, as folks listen, is like this word of reciprocal. And I hadn't really thought about reciprocal, and then even though it's been coming up in my life as of lately, as I mentioned in my job, um, but then what does that actually mean in our relationship, and
Hmm.
how can it be reciprocal for both of us? And then how does the queerness play a role in that? And how does love play a role in that, as a heterosexual man? And how do I experience reciprocal, considering the fact that for the most of my life it's been unreciprocal, really? You know what I'm saying? For a big part of it, where people, or like my mom, really is the one taking care of a lot of the aspects
Hmm.
of my life. So yeah, it's interesting to think about that, and something to think about. So to dive deeper on
Hmm.
in regards to relationships and the dynamics, and how does queerness support this reciprocalness of a relationship, which is an interesting thought to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. Beautifully summarized.
Hmm.
Yeah.
All right, I
Yeah.
think that's
I
it,
think
right?
that's it.
Yeah.
That's our live episode. All
Well,
right.
thank you for the
Yeah.
folks
Thank you
that
so much for
tuned
coming in.
in. We're
Hmm.
gonna probably start recording live all of our episodes. So if you haven't followed, I think it's gonna just be living on your page. So go follow at Claudia Parada, right?
It's Claudia Parada.
It's Claudia Parada. Apologies. And then I'll have mine in there. Mine is de frijol y queso. It's
Yeah, we'll
just
tag you,
I'll
obviously.
be in there, but yeah, thank you for listening. Make sure that you subscribe and you follow us. And if you have any thoughts, make sure you leave us a comment in the feed. And hopefully we get to a point where we can answer some of your guys' questions, which would be
Yeah.
kind of cool to get to. So
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
that would be awesome.
yeah. So
Ooh.
thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good night, everyone.